Hey guys, this is Miss Harlequin, and in today's lesson, we're going to work on identifying the type of language used by an author. Alright, so when we look at the type of language that an author uses, what we're really looking at is part of the author's style. And style is the author's unique way of expressing his or her ideas. It's kind of like when you talk about a person's style, and you talk about the way they wear their hair, the type of makeup, if it's a girl that they use, the type of clothing that they wear. Somebody might have a preppy style, or a nerdy style, or a cool hipster kind of style. It's the same thing in writing. You can have a style, and your style is going to be unique to your particular way of writing. Now, when we're talking about writing, a writer's style is affected by word choice, their use of voice or personality in their writing, their sentence structure, so the types of sentences they use. Do they use a lot of declarative sentences? Do they use a lot of complex sentences? And then also the conventions that they use. So two authors' styles can be as different as their speaking voices or signatures. The same way you can take two random people and their sense of style, the way they dress, the way they carry themselves, can be completely different. But a writer can also change their own style the same way a person can change their personal style. I know that when I was in high school, I dressed very differently than the way that I dress now that I'm an adult. And so writers can change their style for the different types of writing that they're doing, and also if they're writing to different audiences. So for example, if I was going to write a letter to the principal, Mr. Pisacano, I would use a very different style than if I was just writing a casual email to my sister. Alright, so now when we look at an author's style, one of the things we want to focus on is their diction. And diction is basically the writer's word choice. So word choice matters because all words have two meanings, and we've talked about this before. You have the denotation of a word versus the connotation of the word. So we know that denotation starts with a D, and that's the dictionary definition. That is the literal meaning. And connotation is the emotion that's associated with the word. It could usually be positive, it could be negative, and it can also be neutral. So I'm going to look at this illustration for a second. If you call somebody a Catwoman, it might make you associate that person with Catwoman from Batman. But then if you call them a cat lady, that actually has a more negative association. People think of cat ladies as older women who are not married and they have a million cats to take the place of children that they never had. Alright, so when we look at diction, there are a couple of different language choices an author can make. First is formal English or formal diction. So formal diction is carefully written and complete sentences. It's writing where the author does not use any contractions. It follows correct grammar rules and uses sophisticated vocabulary. And usually the tone is going to vary. So when we talk about tone, remember we're talking about the author's attitude, the way they feel about the topic. Then you can have on the opposite end of the spectrum, informal English. Informal English is what we use most days when we're just talking casually to people. It's everyday speech. Informal English has popular expressions being used. So saying that rappers like to have bling bling on them. So slang words, right? If you're wearing really heavy gold chains and a lot of diamonds, referring to that as bling bling is a very informal way of speaking. In informal English, you are going to use contractions. So you'll say things like, I can't do that. If I wanted to be more formal, I wouldn't use the contraction. I would use the full words. I cannot do that. There might be sentence fragments in informal English, and again, the tone is going to vary. Now, one type of informal language is colloquial language. Colloquial language is basically a more sophisticated term to describe everyday formal language. Colloquial language is really just the everyday spoken language. It has a lot of slang words, a lot of contractions. So words that are very casual like stuff, saying, oh, I do a lot of things on the weekend, even using the word thing instead of being more specific, and saying sort of. I sort of get what you're saying, or I kind of get what you're saying. Those are very casual sentences, and they're examples of colloquial language. Now, formal language, again, is going to be the opposite end of the spectrum. If you're writing any kind of formal essay for school, or writing a letter to the principal, or writing a letter to the president, you want to make sure you use formal language. That's more respectful, it's more academic in tone, it has way more complex vocabulary, and it's usually the type of writing you're going to find in textbooks and university essays. So, again, we're looking at formal vocabulary when we're looking at formal language, so words like compensate, interrogate, establish. Now, if I wanted to be more informal or use colloquial language, instead of saying establish, I would use an easier, more casual word like start. Instead of saying interrogate, I might use a more casual, informal word like questions. And instead of saying compensate, if I wanted to be more colloquial, then I might use the word makes up. I tried to compensate for my brother's stupidity by being extra smart. I tried to make up for my brother's stupidity by being extra smart. Now, you can have language that's in the middle, just like with the connotations of words. You can have positive, you can have negative, but you could also have neutral words that don't really have any association. They're in the middle. You can have language that's in the middle. And so medium language is really general. It falls in between informal and formal writing, and it is also acceptable to use this for academic writing. So an example of the three types would be formally telling somebody hello by saying greetings. Greetings, Miss Arlequin. It's a very formal way to say hello to me in the morning. If you want it to be colloquial, very casual, you'd say hi, Miss Arlequin. And if you want it to be in between, you might say hello, Miss Arlequin. Here are some examples of differences between colloquial and formal. If you want it to be very casual, you would ask for something. If you want it to be formal, request. Miss Arlequin requested we take out our homework. Miss Arlequin asked that we take out our homework. Colloquial would be find out, and formal would be discover. In science class, we discovered the theory of evolution. In science class, we found out the theory of evolution. And so, again, look at this list to get a better understanding of words which mean the same thing, but column on the left is the more colloquial way of saying it, and the column on the right is the more formal way of saying it. Alright, so let's practice taking a situation and deciding which type of language would be the most appropriate to use for each of those situations. So our first situation is you're going to arrange a meeting or lunch and you're not going to be able to make it. So you have this appointment set up, you're supposed to meet somebody for lunch, and something else has come up you have to cancel. Now the form that you're going to use to let the other person know that you're canceling the appointment is an email. For the first email, let your professor know that you will not make it to the meeting. The second email, let your best friend know you will not be able to make the meeting. And in the third email, let a classmate know that you're not going to be able to make it to the meeting. Alright, so I need to decide if I'm going to use formal language, colloquial language, or medium language. So I'm going to start with the first email. When I look at the first email, I am emailing my professor. So what type of relationship do I have with the professor? Well, that's usually a more formal relationship. I don't necessarily know my professor on a personal level. They're my teacher. They're the person I'm learning from, so I really need to keep a professional, formal relationship. So I would make sure that I would not use colloquial language here. This would be formal language. Now, my best friend, on the other hand, is somebody that I've probably known my whole life, and I'm very casual with, so this would be a good type of writing to use colloquial language. Okay, so now for the third email, I'm emailing a classmate, and so a classmate is somebody that I'm in class with. I might be friends with them, but not necessarily. There are plenty of classmates that I just spend time with during the school day, but I might not really talk to them that much. And so they're not going to be as close to me as a best friend. They're also not my teacher or an adult. They're on the same peer level as I am. And so I don't have to be as formal with them, but I also don't want to be as casual. So medium language would be perfect for writing to somebody like this. Remember, when you're writing an academic essay, you want to use formal language, and you want to make sure that you avoid contractions. You want to avoid colloquial English or slang. And you want to avoid any kind of abbreviations. Abbreviations are okay for colloquial writing or possibly sometimes medium language writing. But formal should always be spelled out the proper way. Okay, now it is quiz time. So we are going to see if we can properly identify the type of language being used by a writer. You're going to go onto Edmodo, and you'll see there is a quiz assigned to you on formal versus colloquial language. For each of the questions, you're going to get a scenario. It is going to be a sentence or two, and you're going to determine whether or not the writer is using formal language, colloquial language, or medium language.